We have all heard about the debate whether the United Nations actually work, they do something, especially here in international relations. But what's about it? What's the profound of the meaning of the United Nations? Where did it come from? So, in this podcast, we will discuss those things. First of all, we can say it all began with the First World War. At this end, there was a creation of an institution called the League of Nations. Whose idea was it? Well, it was Woodrow Wilson's, the president of the United Nations in that year, 1919. And with his 14 points, the last one said, let's call for a general association of nations, formed under specific covenants for the purpose of affording mutual guarantees of political independence and territorial integrity to great and small states alike. So basically, Woodrow Wilson wanted the creation of an institution that could prevent conflict and settle disputes peacefully. In other words, avoid war at all cost. So, this is the foundation of the League of Nations, as I mentioned before, in 1919. What was the importance of it? Well, it was the first intergovernmental organization established to promote international cooperation and to achieve international peace and security. It marked the beginning of multilateral cooperation. And what were the agreements? Well, member states agreed to renounce the secret diplomacy, committed to reduce their armaments, and agreed to comply with the international law. Moreover, they pledged to respect the territorial integrity and political independence of all the members of the League.
Spoiler, it goes wrong.
So, what happened after League of Nations? Well, after World War II, the United Nations was created, as you know, and its creation was mentioned in San Francisco, California, in April 1945, but it became officially on October 1945 with the ratification of China, France, Soviet Union, United Kingdom, and United States. The principal objective of UN is to maintain peace and international security, but also international cooperation and promote peaceful relationships between states. Its importance it was to maintain, as I said, peace and international security, but it is also focused in another things like human rights, distribute human help, to defend international law, and nowadays to improve climate action. As an important fact, at the beginning there were only 51 states that were into the United Nations, and in 2011, and with its last member that joined it, that was Sudan Republic, well, nowadays there are 193 members.
Well, these two big organizations were and are fundamental if we want to understand which are their paper in the international arena. So now I will talk about some of the big achievements from the League of Nations. First of all, we can say that in 1920, the League convinces Yugoslavia to withdraw troops from Albania. And also in a second place, we can talk about how the League ordered Greece to retire some troops in the Bulgarian territory. So we can say that despite being slightly focused on peaceful matters, also the League of Nations established conferences through the Secretary General on trade treaties and so on. So we can conclude that this League of Nations was more focused on peaceful and in promote peace and that stuff. But there was this path in order to go into trade, in order to get more trade treaties and to grow like global economy. But now let's talk about the United Nations. We can say that United Nations has a more multilateral they work in a more multilateral way, so they have done like big things. The first of all is the peacekeeping operations. I mean, thanks to this, armed conflicts have been prevented, and also civilians were protected. One example that I can say is the mission in East Timor that helped to restore the stability in this country after the post-electoral violence in 1999. Also, we can say that the United Nations is like the big boss in human rights promotion and human rights protection. I mean, I can say that all of us have heard that without the United Nations, like human rights watching and all that stuff might not be as strong as they are now. But also we can talk about the humanitarian assistance. I mean, the UN is a big specialist in promote humanitarian help, such as food, medical care, water, and especially in places where there are these conflict situations. But as we are, human nations is not perfect. So we can talk about how this is an organization that has big effectiveness in conflict resolutions. We can talk about the genocides in Rwanda, the wars in Iraq, the wars in Syria. I mean, we can talk about how the United Nations has failed in helping these vulnerable groups. But we can talk about also how we have now big humanitarian crises that have not been resolved due the failure to implement resolutions. No, we have places like Somalia, Yemen, and Myanmar, and many other places that are like on their own because UN hasn't done like big much for them. No, we can say that. Thank you, UN. But also we can talk. And I think that the main problem in this organization is the political bias. I mean, it is perceived that within key bodies such as the Security Council, the influence of certain hegemonic actors causes that this organization became a biased entity, no? I mean, we can say that UN has like this preference, like this place, that like these countries are like in... I mean, they don't fail. Like they do what they want. They are like too big to control.
And they are perfect.
Well, kind of, but I mean, yeah. Despite all of this, now we can talk about how we understand these organizations.
Yeah, and in how we understand these organizations, I first want to point out that if the United Nations was a teacher, it really has a hard time trying to control the egos of their little kids, especially if those little kids are rich. So yeah, like United States, China, Russia, etc. We're talking about these kind of big babies that have a really big ego, and that has been the biggest problem of them all.
They would be like Tec de Monterrey students, no?
Yeah, exactly. They will be like that, but not being shady, we have to understand also in a theoretical way why were these organizations constructed. I think that there are mainly 2 points of view where we can see this. First, the liberal and realist. I'm going to talk about liberal. I'm not really keen of it. I'm not really trying to say that I defend it, but I really do think that it's a lens that we have to see things through. First, liberalism believes in good governance among states. It believes and tries to change this anarchic nature of the international system. It wants to build a set of values such as order, justice, liberty. So that was the main goal that Woodrow Wilson had at first, trying to create the League of Nations. So if we want to study the League of Nations, their actions at first, everything of this, we have to really see that it had a liberal idea behind it. However, it didn't have liberal countries behind them. That's the reason United States didn't enter. That's the reason Japan, at the first time they were going to be sanctioned, left the League of Nations and really didn't want to be a part of it. So yeah, the League of Nations was a liberal idea. It was constructed by a liberal theory, but it wasn't really well built towards reality. Now let's go towards United Nations. It basically has the same idea as of trying to impose or create liberal values, order, justice, liberty, those that I said. However, this time we had a different approach, and Ikenberry, an author, really points it out into liberal internationalism 2.0, which means having a big daddy, that is United States, saying to everyone what they have to do, what they have to act towards, what institutions they have to believe in, what values they have to bring in their democratic society, because America wants democracy. And I think that this was at first really well constructed. It was at first United States trying to put these values ahead of their own goals, of their own like short-term goals. But as every state in the Middle East has known, it really is not about that, and it hasn't been about that in a lot of years. So this liberal idea of liberal internationalism, even by the author that created it, has been getting some complaints, but it has been getting some concerns, and because of the diminishing power of the United States, I think we're going to be seeing a different kind of approach, or a different kind of things that can be explained towards other lens, and I believe that lens is realism. So let's hear about it.
Well, first we need to understand that realism indicates that states move in the international system to ensure their own survival and to gain power. In the case of the League of Nations, it failed to reconcile national interests and international objectives, which led to the lack of trust and cooperation. Also, it didn't have military power, which is one of the most prominent measures of influence or power, so it tended to not be coercive enough to sanction countries. Also, since the realist theory states that the nation had to act in pursuit of their own interest, the League of Nations was a weak organization, so it was constantly overpowered by those nations who were more powerful while looking for their objectives. Also, the exclusion of Germany and the Soviet Union led to a limited visualization of the international system, which caused a lack of understanding when solving conflicts. On the other hand, applying this perception in the UN, even if it has a lot of multilateral forums, states always act in order to protect their own actions. And despite mechanisms for advising conflicts and promoting peace, realism could contend the limitations in the UN's authority, and coercive power affect its ability to influence state behavior. The lack of its own military force and dependence on contributions from member states limit the UN's capacity to intervene effectively in conflict situations. Also, it has the same problem of the bias from the hegemonic power, since from its cohesion, it has, for example, in the Security Council, has given disproportionate influence to the victorious powers of World War II, reflecting power relations more than a truly egalitarian or cooperational approach.
Okay, so now we have the whole perspective, and I want to ask the question to our forum. The United Nations actually work or not? Let's simulate a round of votation. So let's begin with Emmy. You in or you out?
I mean, that's a tough question.
It depends.
It depends. I mean, I would say like I'm out. I truly believe that organizations like the UN are necessary in order to get peace and to respect each other's, and to have like some point of and to have like some hope in human life and in humans. But I think that as conflict mediators, they are not as good as they promised to be. like, I mean, we have this anarchic system. I mean, Daddy, Javi already said it. I mean, the UN, the US, and all these big countries are like their daddy. So, I mean, I think UN, you are necessary, but you have daddy issues. So go to therapy.
Well, in my opinion, as Javi and Emi said, there is a daddy around the world, and it is United States. And I consider that when United States says that something is correct, it is correct, and when US says that something is not correct, it is incorrect. And also, I consider that United Nations doesn't have the independence that it must have. So. I don't know. Also, the effectiveness resolutions or sanctions that they point to every country, they are not as effective as it should be. But I don't know. What do you think, Faty?
Well, I think that I'm also out since the UN has a lot of biased decisions since it's really dependent of the resources from the countries. So it has to survive also. While the countries fight to survive by their own, the UN has to survive. So I think that if they don't have enough independence, then they can't mediate without being entirely biased by the more powerful countries.
So my turn. I'm sorry, but I'm what they would call me, as Carl would call me, an idealist. I believe in liberalism. I mean, as Hannah Montana said, nobody's perfect.
Nice.
And I believe that the League of Nations, which have actually just studied and explained, it's a perfect example of evolution. We as humans are capable of detecting our own failures, learning from them, and resolving, as most men should. So, the United Nations was an improvement of the League of Nations. We are constantly continuing to study the international system, how actors intervene and they interact among them, and new states incorporate this system. And as Javi mentioned, the values. I am a value person. I think that's the most important, and I do believe in good human nature. I believe we humans have the capability of exercising these values. So it's a process. We're working toward it, but we do need this international institution to help us regulate ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with what you just said. I do also consider myself a little bit of an idealist, but I really believe that the UN works better than not having a UN. I think that the UN is a right step or a step towards the right path. It is a step towards not having any more conflicts. It's a step towards not having any more problems economically or like in a humanitarian aid. And yeah, that's really utopian. I'm giving all the reason to Car, but I'm more of a Kant team, and I really believe that we can have like moral values that go and transcend borders and transcend all these kind of things. And I think the only way to really establish them, to really make them, to really having them take control or having them take power, these kind of values, is by having an organization as powerful and as powerful as possible as it is the United Nations. So yeah, I believe I'm really in, and I think they do a better job mediating conflicts than the Pope did in the 17th century.
So that's it, my friends. Now you answered the question. Is the UN actually helpful, or what should we do?